This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This episode is brought to you by the team at Lechuza, suppliers of self-watering pots and planters. Lechuza brings decades of experience in state-of-the-art precision manufacturing to bear on its stylish, high-functionality range of planters. All Lechuza products are designed in-house and manufactured in the same factory as the iconic Playmobil toys. The complete collection comes in a wide variety of traditional and trend-led colours and shapes, and they're highly reliable for use both indoors and outdoors. The integrated soil irrigation system ensures that the plant receives the perfect amount of water for optimal growth. Thanks to a reservoir that always holds enough water and is controlled by a water level indicator, dried out or overwatered root bales are a thing of the past. Find out more by visiting lechuza.co.uk. This week I'm speaking to smallholder and YouTuber Liz Zorab. Liz has been documenting her growing efforts, firstly via a blog and then via her hugely popular YouTube channel. She's recently written Grounded, A Gardener's Journey to Abundance and Self-Sufficiency, in which she talks about setting up a new site in Wales and how her gardening journey went hand in hand with her journey from ill health to wellness. I started out by asking Liz why so many permaculturists seem to end up moving to Wales.
We moved here because I wanted a reasonable sized garden to grow a few veg, is how I termed it. You know, it was, and then when we found this place, it's just like, wow, it's a beautiful house. It's in a lovely, lovely place. And it was actually much more land than I was expecting. So we were on 8/10 of an acre, which is 4/5, but I always say 8/10. I don't know why. We're on 8/10 of an acre, and there was an empty paddock that had previously had alpacas and a pony in it. And I just looked at it and thought, that's going to be an amazing vegetable garden. And the reason that we wanted this area is when we first started looking for a house, I was working for a professional rugby club in Bristol, and I wanted to be able to commute very easily backwards and forwards. And it was a very simple drive from this house to what was then my work. I had to give the work up because I became poorly. But we were still at the house. And why do so many permaculturists end up in Wales? I think there are a number of reasons. I think there's a socio-economic reason. You know, land historically has been fairly cheap in Wales, although that has now changed, particularly in the last year and a bit. Since we started having the lockdowns, I think people have been reassessing whether they need to be living in a city or not. And I think a lot more have chosen to move to Wales. There is a lot of land in Wales. That's the other thing. So there is a lot of availability of land. And I think culturally, can't speak for the Welsh Society because obviously you can hear I'm not Welsh, but I have lived in Wales for a very, very long time now. And I think culturally, Welsh people are adaptive and instinctive, and I'm going to say they're warm and welcoming because I know they are. But I think they already have some connections with their environment, just culturally.
Interesting. And how about the climate? Is that conducive to growing well?
Well, Wales is known to be quite rainy.
Yep.
That's an understatement. So parts of Wales, and I'm going to stress that, parts of Wales are cooler and damper. It's a hilly area. There are parts that are mountainous, and as the rain comes in from the west, it comes over. It gets stuck over the mountains. There's a thing called stuck clouds. So they literally get stuck, and it's something to do with atmospheric pressure. So clouds stay there, dump all the rain in those areas. So east of those areas are actually drier, not dry, but drier. But it's also quite a mild climate because we're still enjoying all the warmth from the water coming across in the Gulf Stream. So although it's wet, it is quite a mild area, and that's a good growing atmosphere.
So you mentioned you had some health issues. Are you happy to talk about those and how the garden kind of fitted in?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I've had depression for a very long time, and that just kind of sits and hovers, and I've learned ways to manage that as best as possible. I also have SAD, so seasonal affective disorder, which means my mood dips in the autumn and winter, and in the midst of winter, I effectively hibernate. I don't participate in anything very much, which is great because there isn't that much to do in the garden, so I can allow myself that time to be still and be quiet and heal as much as I can during that time. And I also have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is basically underactive thyroid, which messes occasionally with my vitamin and mineral levels, my ability to absorb those. So I've had to find ways to work around that. And it can also just knock me sideways and leave me incredibly exhausted. And that's not predictable. I can't just say, on the third Tuesday of a month, I'm usually a bit low. I can be okay. And halfway through the day, I might hit a wall, and not physically, physically, but not an actual wall is what I'm trying to say. So I might hit that energy wall where I just have to stop, and I have to be kind to myself and be gentle and eat well and rest, and then slowly I'll pick up again.
You have been really poorly with that. How much did the garden factor into it? And indeed, I suppose the attendant eating regime that came with it, with your being self-sufficient, did that affect your health, do you think?
Yes, I think it's helped. I think it's helped no end. So when we moved here, I had spent about 4 months in bed bound, and I just got up to go to the loo and then crawled back to bed again. I was in a mess. So when we arrived, I was using walking sticks, and poor old Mr. J had to do all the moving, and I would sort of stand and say, "Can you move that plant pot there?" And then I'd get down on my hands and knees, and I'd be down there for 10 minutes, and then say, "Oh, you're going to have to help me back up again," because I couldn't get up. So it was really slow going to start with. And as I was doing more, as we know, exercise very often helps you get better, improves things. So as I was doing more, that helped. Once I was growing my own food and we were eating fresher, healthier food and starting to eat seasonally, that helped. And then combined with the thyroid medication I was taking, everything just sort of built up in layers of improvement. So by the end of year 2 here, I was completely off the walking sticks. I hadn't the level of medications my thyroid was taking had leveled out, so I wasn't continuing having to take increased higher and higher doses. And emotionally as well as physically, I just felt fabulous. I felt really good. So I'm not going to say it was any one thing, because I really do think it was a combination of better food, seasonal food, more exercise, more fresh air, more sunshine, and the medication for my thyroid. That combination just works. It worked like magic.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And obviously you were trying to be self-sufficient, and I don't want to spoil the surprise, but how did you get on with that?
Well, we aren't 100% self-sufficient. We are what Mr. J likes to call self-efficient. So we're 100% supply our own fruit and veg in some varieties of fruit and veg. And then there are other things we have to buy. There are some things we'll never grow or never grow enough of. We can't grow pineapples. We can't grow coffee. So there are, even bananas. And so we have a choice. We either don't have them or we choose to buy them. And we choose to buy them because I don't want to not have any of those things. I'm Mr. J without a coffee in the morning So, so there are some things. So, like soft fruits, we grow enough to see us right through the year. So, strawberries, raspberries, currants of various different colours. I grow a huge amount and then preserve them in different ways so that we actually can eat those right through the year. Things like potatoes, I am not a huge fan of stored potatoes. I actually quite like them out of the ground or not bother with them. So in the winter when frost would actually just be turning your potatoes in the ground to mush, we then use different root vegetables. So we start using parsnips, celeriac, root parsley, I'll have missed something out, carrots, and things that can sit in the ground and take the place of those, what we would usually use potatoes for. And then also we'll use beans. So not the green beans, but the beans in the pod. We use those as that kind of filling carby food as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I am going to give a little bit away because in year 3 you had a super successful year. And I was amazed by the amount of food that you managed to produce from the site. Were you surprised at how well you did?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I was really surprised. So year 2, I decided to weigh everything we harvested for a period of 50 days to see what that was like. And that was impressive. I think we got, I don't want to give you the wrong figures, I think we got about 800 pounds of food. I don't know what that works out in kilos. I'm sorry, I'm still old money. And then in year 3, I weighed as best I could everything we grew for a whole 12-month period. It didn't include things that I'd kind of eaten on the way round. So there was a lot of raspberries and a lot of strawberries that never got weighed because, it's nice to eat them as you go around. So that year it was in excess of 2,000 pounds of food in weight, which is a huge amount of food and is enough, more than enough for 2 people for a year.
Yeah, it's an incredible amount. What did you do with the surplus? I know obviously you preserve a lot, but did you still have some over?
Yes, so we still had some over. So we did things like I bartered and swapped. So where there were things that we had shortages of or had none of at all, I swapped with my neighbours and local residents. We did swaps there. And then I also started I gave some away to people who were struggling, but we didn't do very much of that. But what I did do is I started doing a veg box scheme, a mixed veg box scheme on a very, very small scale as a CSA, community supported agriculture model. And I did 7 veg boxes the first year and 20 shares. So it wasn't actually 20 boxes. It was, some of them were like double size boxes. And that was really interesting. In hindsight, this year we're doing less because it was actually a lot of pressure. It was easy to produce that much food, but I just constantly worried that we were going to not produce enough for other people, or if we did produce enough for other people, then not produce enough for us for the year. And our priority has to be feeding us. So it's very possible to produce a vast amount of food on the size plot that we're on. The vegetable garden, so we have a raised bed vegetable garden, and then a market garden style area, and the food forest, and that covers not quite half an acre. So it is, it's a large old area. It's a big garden's worth of growing food. And I'm always conscious when I talk about it, and I sort of think, if I remember my previous gardens, we wouldn't have been able to produce that much, but we would have been able to produce a fair old go at feeding ourselves.
Interesting. Yeah, I think sometimes people overestimate the amount of space they need to be really productive. Sometimes I find that what hamstrings you in the middle of the season is not so much growing the stuff, but it's harvesting it. You can run out of time to do that, can't you?
Time, enthusiasm and energy. Yes, absolutely. And so much seems to come at once. It's so one of the things we have done is I've looked at what can stay in the ground. So anything that can stay in the ground stays in the ground. And I have no worries about leaving things maybe a bit longer than they should be in the ground, just to be able to pace myself a bit more. And I make sure I got lots of things that will just keep without having to do much to them. So lots of squashes. They are, they're great because once they're cured, they'll keep for the best part of a year. And I suppose that's another thing that we use to replace the traditional potato-y type meals, as we will use squashes as well. And the other thing I try and do is I don't, for example, I don't blanch beans before I put them in the freezer. And I know you're supposed to, but I don't, because just the sheer volume. So sheer volume. Beans go in bags in the freezer, and then I'll deal with things at a later date. And then once I've got as much as I can harvested and sorted, I then create meals, ready meals to go. So stuff comes out of the freezer, gets cooked, and then goes back into the freezer as cooked. And then we've got ready meals to use during the winter.
Yeah, I think that's what I liked about the book, was that you don't kind of slavishly stick to the rule book, and you just have a go, and there is a sense of, practicality and a lack of apprehension about the results. And I really like gardeners who just get on and do it and see what the results are. And I kind of get the sense that you're like that. And with that in mind, I wondered if you could talk a bit about your pond building efforts.
My pond building efforts. Oh dear. So the ground here it was incredibly hard and compacted. It's also clay on top of sand and pebbles, and it's so hard you can't dig down into it. And I wanted a pond for a couple of ducks that we got. So there were some bits of wood lying around here, as in tree trunk type bits of wood. So I made those into a shape, laid on the ground, straight onto the ground. And then rather than digging down, there was a piece of butyl liner that was here from not the previous owners, but the ones before that. And it was like, okay, I can use that. And so I put the bits of wood on the ground, sort of a bit smaller than the butyl liner, put the liner over the top, filled it with water, and hey presto, it's a shallow but functional pond, which was just going to be there till I got something else sorted out 5 years ago. And it's still there, and it still works.
Exactly. It works, and it's ingenious, and I wish more people would do that, because instead of waiting 2 years till they've got all the right staff, or it never gets done, at least you just cracked on, did it, and you've got a pond and your ducks are happy. So I like it.
Absolutely. And so much of what is here in the garden is stuff that was scavenged from the garden. So, it's just our budget for doing anything here was so small. I had to think sideways, or lateral thinking, however you want to. I just had to think about anything and everything we wanted. How could I do that for either zero cost or minimal cost?
Yeah.
So, it's a real cheapskate's garden, and I love it for it.
Yes, I think we need more of those. And also I was thinking about people who may be moving to a slightly larger garden or dealing with a slightly larger site. And I wondered how important it was for you to keep a degree of flexibility in the layout of the site itself.
Flexibility has been our most valuable tool. Absolutely. I had drawn out in my head what this was going to be like. And then when I started being here, it was like, oh, that's not quite going to work. So move things around till it works a bit better. And that ability to chop and change and try things, and if they don't work, not be frightened of going, oh, that failed, right, on to the next idea, and just keep trying things. And so we found one of the most useful things was temporary fencing, temporary animal housing, temporary vegetable beds. Anything and everything we did was temporary. Across the whole site, there's only one post that's got a small amount of concrete below it, and that could come out if a fairly abled person gave it a good wriggle. So everything is movable, which allows us to do that chopping and changing and trialing and watching to see how that works or not before deciding whether to leave it there or do something different.
Yeah, it sounds like a very good way of, of going about it, to allow you to, as you say, change depending on the results. And I know when people grow food, a lot of them, I think their main challenge will be dealing with pests. What's your pest management regime like?
So the ducks are allowed into the food forest and the vegetable gardens at various different times of the year. And they deal with the slugs and snails and larvae of things. I haven't worked out everything they eat, but they eat a lot of stuff out there. And for things like cabbage white butterfly and cabbage moth, I've made tunnels out of netting. So I've used piping pushed into the ground with netting over it to exclude butterflies and moths from getting at the brassicas. But I also then plant some cabbages, sprouts, whichever it is, something out in the open to support the butterfly population, because I just think it's so important that we carry on supporting our wildlife. We might not want them eating our food, but I really do want those out there because they're food for other animals, for other forms of wildlife. So I don't use any sprays, lotions, potions, anything like that. I used slug pellets before we got the ducks, and then I just got really uncomfortable with them. I was like, if it's killing the slug, then it's going to damage anything that then eats that slug, and it just didn't seem like a sensible way forward. So from about 3 or 4 months after being here, there have been no slug pellets. So I use no chemicals, and I'm doing inverted commas. I'm waving inverted commas in the air. So I use none of those sorts of things. It's all barrier method, and then planting plants in association or planting plants for pollinators to encourage predators into the garden so that there's natural predators for any of the pests.
Yeah, makes complete sense. So one last question is, you have your YouTube channel. When did you start that, and what prompted that? Well, what prompted you to start the YouTube channel? Was it just to diarise your work on the garden?
No, not really. It was, I wrote a blog for our first year here about moving here and setting up. And I got increasingly frustrated that I was trying to show some quite complex things that I was doing. And so I was having to take 30 photographs, put into a blog post to try, and it still wasn't explaining it very well. And it's suddenly, wouldn't it make more sense to do this as a video? And I was watching YouTube videos of mostly American homesteaders. And eventually I thought, I think I'm going to have to do that. And so 2 things happened. There was, I wanted to be able to show some of the more complicated things that I was unable to express without writing reams and reams of words. And also I wanted to look at an income stream, which potentially YouTube could be. So it was both of those things. And my first my first videos were shaky, nervous, not terribly good. So, bless everybody who struggled through me being very nervous and saying, through all of the first videos. And I did a daily vlog at that point. So I literally just took my phone outside with me and I started talking, and so they weren't very planned, and they were a bit all over the place, but I really enjoyed it. And it took me about 4 months before I relaxed in front of the camera. I said something and I laughed because I'd said something either silly or I was laughing at myself. And from that moment when I laughed at myself, it was like, okay, it's okay to just be chilled and be honest about I make all these mistakes. And from that, the channel has grown quite nicely now. And from that, I have a blog on my website. I have, which now supports the videos that I make on my YouTube channel. So it's almost turned it around. Rather than wanting a video to explain what was on my blog now goes into more depth of what's on a video. And obviously from that also has come the book, which has just been a surprise. I think is the only thing I can say.
So what's next?
Well, there is another book on the way. So I finished actually writing Grounded last August. So all the words were done. It took quite a while for me to find all the photographs because obviously when we moved here, we didn't know I was going to be writing a book. So we spent a long time looking back through to find the photos, and there are lots and lots of photos in Grounded. So I finished writing it. But I'd already got the writing bug by then, and the publishers offered me another contract for a second book. So that will be, all things being equal, that will be out in autumn next year, so 2022. And it will still be recognisably my style. It's probably it's got a bit more instructional stuff in it, but still with the I tried this didn't work, type stuff. So that will be then. And then after that, well, who knows?
So watch this space and tune into Liz's YouTube channel to find out about the next instalment in her growing journey. A big thank you to Liz for taking part in the interview and to you for listening. Please visit lechuza.co.uk to find out more about their indoor and outdoor planters, which feature a built-in irrigation system, so no more wilting houseplants or tomatoes. Now here's Dr. Ian Bedford, talking about one of the smartest bugs to grace our gardens.
One of the most common insects to see in a garden is the ant, a member of the insect order called Hymenoptera, which includes the bees and the wasps. Ants are social insects, living within highly organised colonies that build nests, usually underground, and are governed by a queen. And life within the colony is strictly defined, with each ant having a specific role to play, whether it's scouting and foraging for food, maintaining and defending the nest, or tending to the egg-laying queen and her hundreds of dependent larvae. In Britain, there's over 50 different species of ant, although the most common is the black garden ant, which is often found nesting under paving slabs or around the edge of a lawn. But it's also known to invade our homes, particularly when a sugary food source has been discovered by the colony's scouts. Black ants particularly favour sugary substances, and hence the reason they're often seen collecting honeydew from aphids on the garden plants. But in addition, they also need protein, which they get by eating small flies and other insects. Unlike red ants, these black ants don't sting, but they do fiercely defend their nests by biting and squirting formic acid when they're under attack. They also have a strategy to deal with persistent attacks, which is simply to pick up all the eggs and juveniles and move them away to a new location. And that's useful for us to know, because where a colony has become a problem in the garden, it can simply and harmlessly be encouraged to leave by regularly prodding the nest with a garden fork for a few days. And for colonies that can't easily be accessed, pungent-smelling plants or certain essential oils placed nearby to the nest have been shown to have a similar effect. Remarkably, an ant colony can remain active for many years, and for the black garden ant, that can be around 15 to 20, for as long as the founder queen remains alive. And each year, the colony undertakes its primary mission, which is to create a new generation of reproductive ants, a process managed by the queen, who, at certain times during the year, will lay unfertilised eggs, which go on to develop into males. She'll also allocate some of her fertilised eggs for special treatment, where the resulting larvae are fed a different diet that transforms them from the sterile worker ants into new virgin queens. And when these new reproductive ants eventually mature, they'll have wings, and they'll wait patiently within their nests for a certain set of weather conditions to arrive. Then, when the temperature, humidity and wind speed are just right, they'll flood out of their nests and take to the air in their thousands. Known as the nuptial flight, the males and the new queen black ants from many different nests will swarm together to mate in the sky, before those that survive an onslaught from hungry predators such as swallows and swifts will return to the ground where the males will soon die. The mated queens will then discard their wings before wandering away to find somewhere suitable to start and to rule over their own little ant empires.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.